Cool. Okay. Thanks, Jess, for letting me come into your classroom today to observe listening clarity with your students. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the student voice that was collected, as well as my observation notes on the teaching that I saw happening, and then also your own knowledge about your, why that lesson was chosen, the planning that you put behind it, and the other knowledge that you have around your class. By looking at those three pieces of evidence, what we hope to do is to form a goal for you to be able to help shift your students' agency within the classroom. So their ability to know what they're learning, why they're learning it, and how they can be successful.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add to that agenda?
No, that's fine.
Perfect. Well, we're both here for the same reason.
Yeah.
So I just thought I'd start off by sharing something that I saw from my perspective, and that I think that the way that you shared your learning intention and the way that you got the children to go into the purpose of that learning intention and buddy talk and share enabled them to be able to say what it is that they were learning very successfully.
Yeah.
I also believe that because you had it written up and it was visible for them, that also enabled them to be able to go back and check.
Yeah.
Oh yes, that's the wording of that learning intention.
Yeah.
Some of the evidence that I've got around why I think that is around your student voice. So when I asked your students, what were you learning today? All three of those students there said the same thing. We're learning to revise and recraft our writing.
Yeah.
Dug, dug, dug. All exactly the same and exactly the same way that you'd sort of had it worded and on the board. So they were able to access that really well. Is that what you were expecting them to say around the learning intention?
Maybe not Ocean, but yeah, that is what I'd expect them to say. But yeah, sometimes you can be surprised by what they do say, because they can get confused if it's the what have we been learning this whole week, or what does it mean we've been learning during just this lesson. So yeah, it's good that they all said that.
It is fantastic that they all said that. I did ask them what were they learning today, so using that word there could have potentially prompted.
Yeah.
But you are absolutely right, they quite often do get confused, and I'm learning so much things. But
I get confused sometimes too.
Yeah. Cool. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was the success criteria that you had in there, and some of the confusion that that the students sort of came out with.
Okay.
Like, so when it came to the success criteria, they did say some things that were a little bit different.
Yeah.
And so I think it's worthy probably having a discussion around what might have led to that. Like what might have led for them to kind of get confused. I'll share from my perspective what I think could have possibly caused that, and then I'd love for you to kind of share back your thoughts on it as well. So when I asked them, how do you know that you've been successful in revising and recrafting your writing, as well as why were you learning this, both things they went to like the revising kind of criteria. So they talked about so the reader can understand, which was like the meaning one, and to make sure we don't have spelling and grammar errors. And then to edit, check for mistakes, and check your success criteria. And add to your story, or add strong language. These two here, check your success criteria, and add strong language. They needed to be prompted a little bit more.
Yeah.
From Hannah, and she was probably the more articulate one. Zoe went on a little tangent about 4 smiley faces on our success criteria.
Okay.
And then with prompting, adding similes, which is previous learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Ocean was edit and check for mistakes and check your spelling.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was, like, we had our learning intention evidence that was so strong.
Yeah.
And then we had this confusion.
Confusion there.
Yeah, a little bit there. So I kind of was trying to think what could have led to that confusion. And so from my perspective, I had a couple of theories that I wanted to check out. So the first one was that when you were doing your model, the first part of your model that you did, which was making sure it made sense.
Yeah.
And that sentence there was modelled, and then the children shared back what that success criteria was, and you wrote it in straight away. And they seemed to kind of have a good understanding of that success criteria, that it needed to make sense.
Yeah.
Then your second one that you actually modelled was spelling, and then it didn't get written in.
Yeah.
And then within that little bit of the modelling of the spelling, then you also brought in, I need to go and check my success criteria from the last one.
Yeah.
And so I wondered, by checking their success criteria, were they getting confused with what self-assessment was? Was my wondering with Zoe's comment, possibly?
Yeah. That's probably what it was. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just, that was like wondering, and then the last kind of like parts of the adding in and things like that, they, sort of were still stuck possibly in the adding from my last success criteria or adding from which success criteria. And so from my perspective, I thought that it started off with really strong with that first part, and then it got a little bit confusing. Only because they were referring to an old success criteria, so they might have been thinking, are we self-assessing now? Are we, rather than it being a new lesson.
Because, I had the two. Yeah, I see what you mean. Okay.
Yeah. And it's an easy mistake, I think. I would be guilty of doing the same.
No, I could see that they were a bit confused, so, yeah.
So, what would you want to change if you were to do that lesson again? So, reflecting on it, what would you do differently?
I don't know, because I think it's always good, or I guess, because when they are writing, they still need to be checking their success criteria, but probably just not even having that part in there. I'm not really sure.
So are you wanting your students to revise and recraft after they've self-assessed?
So no, they revise and recraft first, and then the self-assessment comes after that. Is how we usually do it.
Okay. I'm just wondering here, I wonder if you flipped it around the other way, if it would get rid of some of that confusion, as in they self-assess first, because the purpose of self-assessment is to improve.
Well, that makes more sense then.
And then so they would go through,
way better,
and they would be making those improvements. So they'd be putting, I haven't got here.
Yeah.
I'll put in my hearing words now, and then I haven't said over here see, so I'll put those words in now. And they've self-assessed, they've made that improvement.
Because usually we do it at the end, and then I'm like, we don't have time to add things in, so that would work a lot better doing it that way. Yeah. Because in all my planning, that's just the way around it is. So that would be good. Okay.
So I suppose that was the biggest thing that sort of like popped through as a wondering. So it's nice to kind of have a little bit of like, that might work a bit better.
Yeah, that would work way better.
I also did notice, because last year we had the group was quite new for you.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of say that actually looks like it's working
quite
well. Yeah, it has
been actually, especially this year, just actually thinking more about who's going to be in my groups and who am I going to bring down, and actually making sure that I am reading the kids' writing each week, and then just making notes on what they do need to work on, so then I can pull them down for the workshops. It's been working good, and just making sure, like, even just all the things we've been doing, like with the making sure it's on the slides. Like, I find the slides are really helpful because I often forget things, so then I just have everything on there, which is really helpful.
And the students have access to that, do they?
Yeah.
So those were just some other things. I know that you talked about the relevance as well. So, lots of us can do this, but we need to make sure that we meet our goal by adding detail.
Yeah.
So, when I kind of was reflecting on afterwards, like, what some of that disconnect was as well, is that they might have like kind of thought, I'm self-assessing again because I'm adding detail, which is what we were learning. And to make changes and improve, and that improve is also the big picture behind self-assessment as well, which is it's good to have the relevance in there, and I think if we just flip it like what we've kind of said, it will make it even clearer. But apart from that, the buddy talking, the sharing, the peering was done really well, and it gave the students an opportunity to check in. And at the beginning of that lesson, that was done really effectively. And then I think you spotted it, if I'm correct, in that they kind of, when you asked the questions a little bit, later in how to add a sound, they kind of sat there a little bit stunned. And then you went around and you paired them.
Yeah.
And you made sure that they were actually having that conversation.
Yeah.
So is buddy talk and sharing something that's happening a lot now, more in your class?
Yeah, we do it all the time.
Yeah. Because that was also like another goal from last year, wasn't it? The buddy talk.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
I don't know, I've always done it. Well, not always, but I've done it always here, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was. I can't remember.
Yeah. I think it was at one point, but it might have been even last year, last year, 2019. But I remember it being a goal at one point, trying to get the children to kind of.
I feel like when I get nervous, I just don't do it. So then I just ask them because I'm like, But yeah.
So really, I suppose I'm bringing this all back now. We've talked about probably 3 or 4 different sort of things there.
Yeah.
And if we start trying to put that together into some sort of goal, we've talked about the success of the learning intention, and
Yeah. Oh, yes.
as in the children.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that they were able to articulate that really well, and what led to that. We've also talked about some of the confusion in the success criteria, and how when the difference between revising, recrafting, and self-assessing. And we've also talked about the relevance, and how sometimes the relevance, if it goes back to the learning intention of the previous one, then that can add to that confusion as well. And then we also talked about the power of buddy talking and involving the students. So what sticks in your head is, that's my big thing that I want to take away.
Around.
Yeah. Okay.
That just is just like bing. Why did I do that before?
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do we want to word this?
To teach self-assessment before, or not even to teach it, but just to get the kids to actually self-assess first, and then move on to revising and recrafting. Because from the self-assessment, they'll know what they need to make changes, or what needs to be changed.
Yeah. And I suppose that going back to that big picture of self-assessment should be your first place to be able to make that improvement. And then revising and recrafting is an opportunity to go, yes, adjectives weren't part of my success criteria, but I can recraft by adding those powerful words in anyway.
Yeah.
So you've got add, change, delete, make sure it makes sense, and then you've got your surface features of punctuation and spelling.
Okay, that's what we had to change, delete.
I mean, it's your success criteria might be slightly different, but that's just generally what you're trying to get out of them. So we've got here to teach self-assessment first, and then move on to revise and recraft, so that students are clear about the purpose of both self-assessment and revision. Does that make sense?
On both self-assessment
and revision. So it's the place of why do we self-assess? It's to make improvement against that criteria. Revising and recrafting is to actually get our writing at that next level that it might be ready for publishing almost. Yeah. Cool. Is there any support or any help that you might need in achieving that goal?
No, I probably just need to switch it around on all my things.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And what sort of time frame do you think will be?
Next week.
Next week, yeah. So I'd love to hear back, like next week, and see if it...
I'm actually kind of excited about that now. That's not really weird, but yeah, that's funny. I didn't even think of switching them around.
Cool.
Is that the way you teach it?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And revising, recrafting is important and things like that. But I like to kind of wrap the lesson up with the self-assessment being really powerful on that bit of learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, cool. So we might just take a minute now to have a little look at the student matrix and the teacher matrix, and we'll have a little look at it based on what your students were able to do today.
Okay.
When it came to sharing what they're learning, why they're learning, and how they can be successful.
Yeah.
And then let's see if we can make a prediction about if we mastered that goal, what difference it might make. So I'll just go here. This one here, first of all, is the teacher one. And so if we just have a little look along these clarity lines, we can see teachers can describe and students are beginning to describe what is to be learnt, the relevance of learning intentions to the big picture and to their own lives. So when it comes to you and your students, definitely can talk about what is to be learnt. When it comes to the relevance, you can talk about, you talked about the bigger picture of the relevance, and the students kind of got that big picture, but again I was a bit unclear as to what was driving the big picture. Was it from their previous work or was it from that lesson? So it was a little bit, wasn't sure if the relevance there for them was making absolute sense or not.
You mean the relevance of the lesson?
Yeah, so you shared that it was lots of us can do this, but we need to be adding detail. And in that lesson there, because of the student voice around the how do we be successful, I wasn't sure if that relevance was adding to their confusion or if it was helping. I'm unsure there. There. But we can see that, like, generally speaking, this is kind of where we are sort of sitting. If we look at the next one up, both teachers and students are able to describe what is to be learnt, the full relevance of that learning, how they will know when it has been learnt, success criteria, examples and modelling. So, and then if we look over here to how they will know when it has been learnt, success criteria, examples, modelling, the relevance of that learning task. So we can see that are beginning to, but students still find it difficult to describe. So this is sort of where our students are for that one there. But then this is where our students are for the learning intention. And for us to kind of move along a little bit, we'd probably need both of them to be beginning to describe or being able to describe. So for some students they might be moving to here, and some students they might be moving up here. So the student one is virtually the same, it mirrors it. So students are able to describe the learning intention for their group. They all could. Students are able to describe the learning in global and specific terms is the next step. So they might have that big picture and so this is where I'll just put jazz for where your students are for learning intention. And then if we look at the success criteria, so students may be able to say or locate success criteria but may not have an understanding of how these are used to improve their learning. We did get some of them in there, versus students are able to describe the success criteria and how they help their learning. Does that make sense? Because I don't think it's back here, unable to discuss success criteria, because they actually did have particularly the one, the first two that were modelled, which was the making sense and the spelling. And then the other one kind of put them back onto, that's self-assessment though. So we can go able to locate there. So where would you see, if they weren't getting confused by self-assessment, where would you hope that you'd want your kids to be after mastering your goal?
That one to move up to
here. So this is what you want.
I think you could definitely get some students that are working at that stage 4, but I don't think you'd get all of them. So you might have some up here. Cool. I think you'd be spot on with that. And it's quite nice sometimes seeing the jumps and where your kids can actually go to. And we didn't do that last time, did we?
No. I think towards the end we started looking at the matrix, but we're trying to be better this year
Yeah.
and actually making sure that we refer back to them so
Yeah.
you can see your own growth,
Mm.
but also you can see the impact that that's having on your kids and their ability to be able to talk about their learning and understand it. Also, thanks so much. So I'll just, before you go, get you just to, like in your own words, or if you want to use that as notes, just to reiterate what your goal is going to be.
So I'm going to teach my self-assessment first, and then I'm going to move on to doing the revising and recrafting so that they don't get confused. What did you put on the end?
Yep.
Just so that they're clear, because they got confused,
Which is which.
Which I wouldn't have realised until you said that.
Yeah. And your success criteria for your revising and recrafting, what would you see would be a good success criteria for that?
So to reread their writing to make sure it makes sense. Yeah. So reread their writing to make sure it makes sense, and make changes if it doesn't.
Yeah.
To add any adjectives, verbs, adverbs. Would you put in there to add the paragraphs? Because that was the one that I had. Oh yeah, because you're revising.
If you're revising, so you'd be indicating where paragraphs are.
Yeah. And I had, what did I have? I wonder if...
So it makes sense, add.
If they wanted, they could search synonyms if they wanted to.
Yeah, so that's change.
Yep, so change.
Synonyms.
And then I quite like your delete one, so.
Delete. Yeah. And that's sort of like if you've got run-ons or you've got...
Or they've repeated themselves.
And then you can bring in your surface things like spelling. And you can bring in your paragraphs.
So we have it like... So I will have... Editing is one thing, but then can I just merge... I could just merge it as revising and recrafting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what I sort of felt like was happening anyway.
Yeah, and that's actually when we looked at that, that's what the kids came through, is they saw revising and recrafting as actually the editing process.
Yeah, and I was kind of trying to steer away from it because I was like, no, that's not what we're doing, but it still is revising and recrafting. So.
Yeah, but their first port of change and improvement
is
self-assessment. Yeah. Cool, so you happy with that?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll photocopy both sheets.
Yeah.
And I'll pop them inside your cubbyhole, but I'll also scan them in and email them to you so that we can use them for our meeting next week to kind of put straight into our own matrix so we can kind of track our own progress and have a look at what our kids are telling us and where that means we're going to head to next.
Yeah.
Cool. So thanks so much.
Cool. That's all right. Thank you.
Hopefully my video came out all right.